The 4-Hour Workweek by Timothy Ferriss became famous because it challenged one of the most deeply accepted ideas in modern life, that success must come from long hours, delayed freedom, and decades of hard work before real living begins. Ferriss looked at the traditional path: study hard, work hard, save money, retire late, and asked a disruptive question. What if freedom does not need to wait until the end of life? What if you could redesign work and lifestyle much earlier? That idea immediately caught attention because it spoke to a quiet frustration many people feel. They are busy all the time, but not necessarily free. They may earn money, but they do not control their schedule. They may look successful on paper, but they feel trapped by obligations, meetings, and routines. Ferriss put words to this dissatisfaction and offered an alternative model. This book is not really about working only 4 hours a week in a literal sense for every person. The title is provocative, but the deeper message is about lifestyle design. It is about questioning the default script. Why assume that more work automatically means more value? Why assume that retirement is the first time you deserve freedom? Why accept a life built around constant busyness if a smarter structure is possible? Ferriss argues that many people are not actually seeking money for its own sake. What they really want is what money seems to provide: freedom, choice, mobility, experiences, control over time, and relief from unnecessary stress. Once you understand that, the goal changes. Instead of pursuing income blindly, you start asking what kind of life you want income to support. This is why the book feels so different from traditional career advice. It does not begin with loyalty to existing systems. It begins with personal freedom. Ferriss wants readers to step back and examine the assumptions shaping their lives. Are you living intentionally, or are you just following a model you inherited from society? That question is what gives the book its power. Even people who disagree with parts of Ferriss's style often admit that the book forces useful reflection. It makes you reconsider work, time, productivity, and the trade-offs you have accepted without questioning them. In the end, the 4-Hour Workweek became popular because it did more than offer tactics. It gave people permission to imagine a different kind of life. And once that possibility enters the mind, it becomes difficult to ignore. One of the book's biggest ideas is Ferriss's concept of the new rich. This is his term for people who do not wait until traditional retirement to enjoy freedom. Instead of spending the best years of life trapped in routines they dislike, they build systems that give them more control over time now. Ferriss contrasts this with what he sees as the old model: work as much as possible, save aggressively, postpone enjoyment, and hope that one day, maybe decades later, you will finally have the freedom to live on your own terms. He thinks this deferred life plan is deeply flawed. It assumes that energy, health, curiosity, and opportunity will all still be available later in the same way they are now. It also assumes that suffering through decades of unwanted structure is the price of eventual freedom. The new rich think differently. They prioritize mobility, flexibility, selective luxury, and control over time. Ferriss argues that this kind of wealth is often more meaningful than simply having a large number in a bank account. After all, what good is money if you have no time to use it, no freedom to move, and no space to actually enjoy your life? This idea pushes readers to redefine success. Instead of asking, "How much money do I want?" Ferriss encourages a more useful question: "What specific life do I want to live?" Once that is clear, the next question becomes, what would it cost to create that life, and how can I design work around it? That shift matters because many people overestimate how much income they need and underestimate how much their lifestyle is shaped by habits and assumptions. Ferriss points out that some forms of freedom are not mainly bought through extreme wealth. They are created through smarter choices, lower overhead, location flexibility, automation, and focusing only on what truly matters. This does not mean every person can or should live exactly like Ferriss. But the underlying lesson is powerful. Do not blindly accept a delayed version of life if there are ways to create meaningful freedom much earlier. The new rich are not necessarily people with the highest incomes. They are people who have learned to build lives with better ratios between effort, income, and freedom. That is what Ferriss wants the reader to notice. Wealth is not just about accumulation. It is about autonomy. That idea becomes the emotional core of the book. If freedom is the real goal, then work should be redesigned around freedom rather than the other way around. Ferriss organizes much of the book around a four-part framework called DEAL. The letters stand for definition, elimination, automation, and liberation. This framework gives the book its structure and shows how Ferriss thinks a person can redesign work and lifestyle more intentionally. Definition is about questioning old assumptions and defining what you actually want. Ferriss believes most people are living according to borrowed goals. They chase promotions, bigger salaries, and more status without first deciding whether those things truly lead to the life they want. In this stage, the reader is pushed to think clearly about fears, dreams, priorities, and the real meaning of freedom. Elimination focuses on removing what is unnecessary. Ferriss is obsessed with efficiency, but not in the usual sense of simply doing more tasks faster. He wants people to remove low-value work, endless interruptions, and pointless obligations. The goal is not to become a machine. The goal is to stop wasting life on activities that create little benefit. Automation is where income and work systems become more scalable. Ferriss explores ideas like outsourcing, delegation, and building businesses that do not require constant personal involvement. This is the stage where he tries to create leverage so that income becomes less tied to endless personal effort. Liberation is about mobility and freedom from fixed location or unnecessary office structure. This part reflects Ferriss's interest in remote work, mini-retirements, and designing a life where work supports experience instead of consuming it. What makes DEAL memorable is that it moves from mindset to action. First, clarify what matters. Then remove waste. Then build systems. Then create greater freedom. It is a logical sequence, and even if a reader does not agree with every tactic, the framework itself remains useful. It also helps explain why the book feels bigger than a simple business guide. Ferriss is not only teaching productivity hacks. He is trying to change the way people think about the relationship between work and life. The power of DEAL is that it invites redesign. Instead of assuming you must live inside the default model, Ferriss asks you to rebuild your model from the ground up. What do you really want? What can be cut? What can be systemized? What can be freed? Those questions are the engine of the book. And once you start asking them honestly, your view of work can change very quickly. The first stage of DEAL, definition, is where Ferriss tries to break the reader out of conventional thinking. He believes many people stay stuck not because they lack options, but because they never question the assumptions behind their choices. They assume risk must always be avoided, security is always safer than freedom, and success means following familiar milestones. Ferriss challenges this by asking people to examine their fears directly. One of his most memorable exercises is fear setting. Instead of only setting goals, he encourages the reader to define the worst-case scenario, think about how likely it really is, and consider how recoverable it would be if things went badly. This is powerful because vague fear often has more control than actual danger. When fear is named clearly, it often becomes smaller and more manageable. He also introduces the idea of dreamlining. Instead of vague life goals, he wants concrete lifestyle goals. What experiences do you want? What kind of mobility do you want? What skills do you want to develop? What kind of daily life would excite you? Then he asks what it would realistically cost to begin building that life. This is important because people often aim too abstractly. They say they want to be rich, but what they really want might be the ability to travel, spend time with family, learn languages, or work independently. Those are different goals, and they may require much less money than people assume. Definition is really about psychological freedom. Before changing external systems, Ferriss wants readers to challenge internal limits. He pushes them to stop using socially approved goals as substitutes for real thinking. A title, a salary, or a prestigious career may not mean much if the life attached to it feels empty. This part of the book is deeply effective because it speaks to something emotional. Many people know they are not fully satisfied, but they have never paused long enough to define what they would actually prefer. Ferriss insists that clarity comes before redesign. He also makes a provocative argument. Doing what is exciting and meaningful may appear risky, but spending years in a life you do not want is also a major risk. It is a quieter risk, but often a bigger one. Definition matters because without it, all later productivity or business advice becomes aimless. You can eliminate, automate, and optimize forever, but if you never define what kind of life you are trying to create, then all that effort may simply make you more efficient at living the wrong life. The second stage of deal is elimination, and this is where Ferriss becomes most associated with ideas about productivity. But his approach is not the usual productivity approach of stacking more tools, habits, and systems onto an already overloaded schedule. Instead, he asks a more radical question. What if the biggest improvement comes from removing things rather than organizing them better? Ferriss draws heavily on two core ideas here. The first is the Pareto principle, often called the 80-20 rule. This is the idea that a small percentage of inputs often create a large percentage of results. In practical terms, a small number of clients may generate most of the income. A small number of tasks may generate most of the progress. A small number of habits may create most of the improvement. The second is Parkinson's law, which says that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. In other words, if you give yourself all day for something, it may take all day. If you give yourself one focused hour, you may discover it can be done much faster. Ferriss uses these principles to argue that busyness is often a form of laziness in disguise. It allows people to feel productive without making hard choices about what truly matters. By staying busy, they avoid prioritizing. By filling the day, they avoid asking which tasks create real value. So elimination means identifying the few activities that matter most and cutting back the rest. This might mean reducing low-value clients, saying no to unnecessary meetings, limiting email, shortening decision cycles, and removing information overload. Ferriss is especially strong on the point that information can become a burden. Reading everything, monitoring everything, and responding to everything can consume life without improving outcomes. This part of the book is highly useful because it attacks the emotional comfort of busyness. Many people feel safe when occupied, but Ferriss wants effectiveness instead of constant movement. He wants results, not noise. Elimination also creates mental clarity. When fewer inputs compete for attention, more energy becomes available for meaningful work. Decisions become simpler. Progress becomes easier to see. Stress often decreases because the mind is no longer scattered in 10 directions. Ferriss's core lesson here is simple but powerful. Most people do not need better time management as much as they need better selection. Do less, but choose better. That is where much of freedom begins. One of the most practical parts of the 4-hour workweek is Ferriss's argument for a low-information diet. He believes that many people consume far more information than they actually need, and that this constant intake makes them anxious, distracted, reactive, and less effective. This idea feels even more relevant today than when the book was first published. News alerts, social media, endless emails, notifications, videos, and online commentary can easily fill every gap in attention. Ferriss sees this as a trap. Most of it feels useful in the moment, but much of it produces little meaningful improvement in action or decision-making. He argues that people often confuse access to information with progress. Just because you know more updates does not mean you are moving closer to your goals. In fact, excessive information often delays action because it keeps the mind in a constant state of intake rather than output. So Ferriss recommends becoming highly selective. Read less news. Check email less often. Stop treating every notification as urgent. Limit the amount of material you consume that has no direct connection to what you are trying to do. This is not ignorance for its own sake. It is intentional filtering. The goal is to protect attention. Ferriss understands that attention is one of the most valuable resources in modern life. If it is constantly fragmented, then deep work, strategic thinking, and meaningful progress become much harder. A low-information diet is really an attention management system. He also points out that urgency is often manufactured. Many things feel pressing simply because they arrive instantly. But instant delivery does not automatically make something important. When people react to every incoming message, they train others to control their time. This part of the book is useful because it moves productivity beyond task lists and into mental environment. It asks a deeper question: what kinds of inputs are shaping your mind every day? Are they helping you act more clearly, or are they simply making you more agitated and distracted? Ferriss's answer is that less can often be more. Less noise. Less checking. Less random consumption. More focus. More clarity. More purposeful action. That lesson remains one of the book's strongest practical takeaways. Freedom is not only about escaping offices or automating businesses. It is also about reclaiming your attention from a world designed to scatter it. The third stage of deal is automation, and this is where Ferriss turns from productivity into leverage. His central idea is that if income depends entirely on your constant personal effort, then freedom remains limited. You may earn well, but your time is still tightly controlled. Ferriss wants to change that by creating systems that keep working even when you are not directly involved every minute. This is why he talks so much about outsourcing, delegation, and business models that can run with low ongoing input. In particular, he is interested in what he calls a muse, a small business built around a focused product, simple marketing, and automated fulfillment. The purpose of this kind of business is not necessarily to become massive. It is to create reliable income with minimal complexity. That distinction is important. Ferriss is not always aiming for a giant company. He is often aiming for a business that is small but efficient enough to support the desired lifestyle. This reflects his larger philosophy. The point is not maximum scale at any personal cost. The point is leverage that supports freedom. He also recommends testing ideas cheaply before making large commitments. Rather than building something huge and hoping it works, Ferriss prefers small experiments. Test demand first. Find out whether people actually want the product. Use simple systems. Reduce risk where possible. Outsourcing also plays a big role here. Ferriss became well known for promoting virtual assistants and remote delegation. His logic is that many tasks consume energy without requiring your personal involvement. If those tasks can be handed off at reasonable cost, then your time can be redirected toward higher value work. This idea is powerful, though it also requires judgment. Not everything should be outsourced. Some tasks are central to quality or identity. But Ferriss's broader lesson remains useful. Stop assuming you must personally do every single thing. Ask which tasks truly require your best attention and which ones are simply habits of control. Automation is really about multiplying output while reducing personal friction. It is about designing work so it becomes less fragile and less dependent on constant manual effort. For entrepreneurs, freelancers, and creators, this can be a major shift in thinking. The deeper message is that freedom usually requires structure. It is not created by random hustle. It is created by systems that reduce unnecessary involvement while preserving value. That is the core promise of automation in Ferriss's world. The fourth stage of deal is liberation, and this is where Ferriss's vision becomes most visible. Liberation is about separating work from a fixed place and from outdated assumptions about how professional life must look. It is about creating more mobility, more flexibility, and more direct control over your own schedule. When Ferriss wrote this book, remote work was far less common than it is now. His ideas sounded more radical at the time. But the core message was simple: if your work can be done without constant physical presence, then why stay trapped in a rigid system that limits where and how you live? Liberation includes ideas like negotiating remote arrangements, testing results-based work rather than hours-based work, and showing that productivity can actually improve when unnecessary office time is reduced. Ferriss believes many companies and managers are too attached to visible presence and not focused enough on actual output. This section also connects strongly to Ferriss's idea of mini retirements. Rather than waiting until old age for a long period of freedom, he suggests taking extended periods of travel, exploration, learning, or lifestyle experimentation throughout life. This reflects his belief that freedom and adventure should not be postponed indefinitely. There is a bigger philosophical idea here. Time is not just something to fill with work until later life becomes available. Time is life itself. Ferriss wants people to stop treating their best years as raw material for a future that may or may not arrive in the form they imagine. Liberation also pushes readers to question identity. Many people define themselves through job structure, office routine, or visible busyness. When those external frameworks are removed, a deeper question appears: how do you actually want to live? That can be exciting, but also uncomfortable. This part of the book remains influential because it anticipated many later conversations about remote work, digital nomadism, location independence, and results-based productivity. Even readers who never travel full-time can still benefit from the larger lesson. Examine whether your current work structure is truly necessary, or whether it persists mainly because it is conventional. Ferriss's message is that work should support life, not consume it entirely. Liberation is the stage where that principle becomes visible in time, geography, and daily experience. It is the practical expression of the freedom the book has been building toward all along. One of the most memorable and controversial ideas in the 4-hour workweek is Ferriss's concept of mini-retirements. Instead of working nonstop for decades and saving all freedom for late life, he suggests taking periods of extended lifestyle freedom throughout adulthood. These periods might include travel, learning, rest, experimentation, cultural immersion, or simply living differently for a while. Ferriss sees this as a more intelligent use of life. He questions the assumption that retirement should be a single block at the end. Why delay all adventure, rest, and exploration until your energy, health, or flexibility may be lower? Why not distribute some of that living across the years when you can enjoy it more fully? This idea connects strongly to his larger rejection of deferred life plans. Mini-retirements are his way of making freedom part of life's design now rather than later. They also create psychological renewal. A person who periodically steps outside routine may return with more clarity, creativity, and perspective than someone who stays trapped in the same pattern year after year. Ferriss also suggests that mini-retirements challenge fear. Many people are terrified to step away from conventional structures because they imagine everything will collapse. But once they experience a different rhythm of life, they may realize that much of what they feared was social pressure more than actual danger. Of course, this concept is easier for some people than others. Financial obligations, family responsibilities, immigration limits, health concerns, and career structures can all affect what is realistic. But even so, the underlying insight remains valuable. Freedom does not always need to be all or nothing. It can be inserted in meaningful ways throughout life. Mini-retirements are also useful as a mental concept because they force the reader to ask what they are postponing. What kind of life experience are you telling yourself will happen later? What if later keeps moving farther away? This section makes the book feel more human. Ferriss is not only talking about efficiency and income systems. He is talking about lived experience. He is asking whether your calendar reflects what you actually value. The deeper lesson is not that everyone must leave for months at a time. The lesson is that a life designed only around future freedom may quietly waste the present. Mini retirements are Ferriss's challenge to that pattern. They are his way of saying that life should include living now, not just preparation for living later. A major strength of the 4-hour workweek is that Ferriss does not tell people to jump blindly into massive risk. In many parts of the book, he actually favors small experiments over dramatic leaps. He encourages readers to test assumptions, validate ideas, and build lean systems instead of betting everything on unproven plans. This shows up especially in his business advice. If you want to create a product or service, Ferriss suggests testing demand first. Can you advertise it before fully building it? Can you see if people respond before investing heavily? Can you run a small version and learn quickly? This way of thinking reduces emotional attachment and increases real feedback. That mindset is valuable well beyond business. It reflects a general principle of intelligent change. Do not rely only on imagination when reality can provide a better answer. If you are considering a new model of work, a side business, a remote arrangement, or a major shift in lifestyle, Ferriss wants you to test rather than fantasize endlessly. This is one reason the book feels more tactical than purely inspirational. Ferriss is not just saying, follow your dreams. He is saying, build experiments that show whether the dream is workable. That is a stronger approach because it moves ideas out of abstraction and into evidence. He also favors simplicity. Instead of building complicated companies with huge overhead, he prefers smaller models with clear offers, manageable costs, and the potential for automation. Again, this reflects his broader philosophy. The point is not maximum complexity or prestige. The point is effective leverage. This section can be very useful for people who feel stuck between employment and entrepreneurship. Ferriss offers a middle path. Start small. Test quickly. Learn from the market. Reduce risk where possible. Let real response guide the next step. It is a practical reminder that life redesign does not have to begin with a dramatic identity shift. It can begin with a small experiment, a weekend project, a test offer, or a limited pilot. Momentum often comes from action, not from waiting until certainty appears. Ferriss's deeper message here is that experimentation creates freedom. It reduces fear because it replaces vague possibility with real-world information. And once you begin running better experiments, the path toward a more independent life often becomes much clearer. To understand the 4-hour workweek well, it helps to see both its strengths and its limitations. One of its greatest strengths is that it forces people to question default assumptions. It asks hard questions about work, freedom, time, and lifestyle. It reminds readers that busyness is not the same as effectiveness, and that income without autonomy may not feel like real wealth. The book also offers genuinely useful tools. The 80-20 principle, fear setting, low information dieting, automation, testing business ideas, and focusing on outcomes over appearances are all practical ideas that many people can apply in some form. Ferriss is especially effective at showing that much of what people call necessity is actually habit, fear, or social imitation. At the same time, the book can be misread if taken too literally. The title itself creates unrealistic expectations for some readers. Not everyone can or should aim for an actual 4-hour workweek. Many meaningful careers require sustained effort, deep engagement, and responsibilities that cannot be fully automated or outsourced. There is also a risk that readers focus too much on escape and not enough on purpose. Ferriss is very strong on freedom, but some people may need a stronger sense of contribution, service, or craft than the book emphasizes. A life optimized only for convenience can eventually feel shallow if it is not connected to something meaningful. In addition, some of the tactics in the book fit certain personalities, industries, and stages of life better than others. Entrepreneurship, remote mobility, and aggressive outsourcing are more realistic for some people than for others. So the wise way to read Ferriss is not as a rigid formula, but as a challenge to think more independently. That balanced reading makes the book much more useful. You do not need to copy Ferriss's exact lifestyle. You need to learn from his principles. Question assumptions. Focus on what matters. Remove low-value tasks. Build leverage where possible. Protect your time. Design life intentionally. When read this way, the book becomes much stronger. It is not a fantasy about effortless wealth. It is a provocation against needless complexity and needless delay. It asks readers to become more conscious architects of their lives. That is why the book remains influential. Even when its style feels extreme, the questions it asks are still valuable. And sometimes a provocative book is useful precisely because it shakes people out of patterns they would otherwise never examine. At its heart, The 4-Hour Workweek is a book about freedom through design. Timothy Ferriss's core message is that many people are living according to default scripts they never consciously chose. They work longer than necessary, consume more information than useful, accept more obligations than meaningful, and postpone the life they want until some future point that may never arrive as expected. Ferriss argues that this can be changed by redefining success, eliminating what does not matter, automating what can be systemized, and liberating yourself from outdated work structures. You can create a life with more autonomy, more mobility, and more control over time. In his view, wealth is not just the amount of money you make. It is the amount of freedom your systems create. Several major lessons stand out. First, question inherited assumptions about work and retirement. Second, define what you actually want instead of chasing vague status. Third, use elimination to focus on high-value tasks and cut noise. Fourth, protect your attention by reducing information overload. Fifth, build leverage through systems, delegation, and smart business design. Sixth, remember that time is life, so do not postpone all freedom indefinitely. What makes this book memorable is not that every tactic fits every reader. It is that Ferriss thinks differently from the default culture of busyness. He refuses to treat endless work as automatically noble. He refuses to assume that the office is always necessary. He refuses to believe that life should be postponed until old age. That independence of thought is the real engine of the book. If you take one main idea from the 4-Hour Workweek, let it be this: do not optimize a life you do not actually want. Step back first. Define the life that matters to you. Then build systems, habits, and work structures that move you toward that life. That may mean entrepreneurship for some. For others, it may mean remote work, fewer obligations, more focused priorities, or simply a better relationship with time. The exact form can vary, but the deeper principle remains the same. Work should serve life, not swallow it whole. And once you begin living from that principle, even in small ways, the entire logic of your decisions can start to change.